They said billionaires never look back at the women they leave behind, but on the night Ethan Blackwood married another woman, one glance across a ballroom destroyed the life he thought he wanted. The crystal chandelier above the Grand Windsor Hotel scattered golden light across hundreds of guests dressed in diamonds and tailored tuxedos, while a violin quartet played softly near the marble staircase. But none of that was what made Ethan stop breathing. It was the sound of shattering glass. A silver tray slipped from trembling fingers and crashed across the ballroom floor, champagne exploding over polished marble like falling stars. Conversations died instantly. Heads turned. And standing in the center of the silence was Claire Donovan. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs so hard it almost hurt. 5 years. 5 years since he last saw her standing in the rain outside their tiny apartment, while he climbed into a black town car and chose ambition over love. 5 years since he convinced himself leaving her was necessary. 5 years since he buried every memory of the only woman who had ever looked at him before the money. But now she stood less than 20 feet away wearing a black waitress uniform with the hotel logo stitched over her chest, her blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her cheeks pale from exhaustion, and beneath the apron tied carefully around her waist was the unmistakable curve of pregnancy. Ethan forgot the guests. Forgot the cameras. Forgot the bride standing beside him in a custom white gown worth more than most people's yearly salary. Because Claire was pregnant. His throat tightened as she immediately crouched to clean the broken glass before anyone could yell at her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low murmur spreading through the ballroom. Her hand instinctively moved to support her stomach as she knelt, and Ethan felt something cold crawl down his spine. She looked thinner than he remembered. Tired. Fragile in a way Claire never used to be. The old Claire laughed loudly, danced barefoot in kitchens, and believed people could love each other without conditions. This woman looked like life had taught her otherwise. "Are you kidding me right now?" Victoria Hale snapped into the microphone near the wedding stage, her voice sharp enough to cut through the room. Red wine dripped down the front of her designer gown where the tray had splashed her. "Do you know how much this dress costs?" Several guests laughed quietly while Claire lowered her eyes and apologized again. Ethan noticed she never once looked directly at him. That hurt more than he expected. Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically before turning toward the guests with a polished smile that barely hid her irritation. "Apparently the hotel is hiring pregnant waitresses now." More laughter. Claire's fingers tightened around a broken champagne flute. Ethan saw it. So did no one else. Then something slipped from Claire's apron pocket and fluttered onto the marble floor beside the shattered glass. A white envelope. Ethan moved before he could stop himself. Victoria called his name, confused, but he barely heard her. The ballroom seemed strangely distant as he bent down and picked up the envelope. The first thing he saw was an ultrasound photo. The second thing he saw made all the blood drain from his face. Estimated due date, October 14th. Ethan's hand began to shake. Because October 14th was impossible. Unless the baby had been conceived during the final week, Claire still belonged to him. The ultrasound photo trembled slightly between Ethan Blackwood's fingers as the noise of the ballroom faded into a distant blur. October 14th. He read the date again, slower this time, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes already understood. That date was impossible, unless the child had been conceived during the final week Claire still lived in his apartment overlooking West 82nd Street. The same week she cried quietly in bed while he answered business calls at 2 in the morning. The same week he promised her everything would get better once the company stabilized. The same week he already knew he was leaving her. "Ethan?" Victoria's voice sharpened beside him, drawing attention from nearby guests. "What are you doing?" He barely heard her. His eyes remained locked on the black and white ultrasound image clipped inside. The envelope. Tiny hands. Tiny feet. A life he never knew existed. Claire reached for the papers immediately, her cheeks flushing with panic. "Please," she whispered softly, trying to pull the envelope back. "Do not do this here." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Ethan stared at her hand as it touched his wrist for the first time in years. It was colder than he remembered. Rougher, too. Claire used to paint little watercolor cards at their kitchen table, while humming old country songs under her breath. Her hands had once smelled like vanilla lotion and coffee grounds. Now her knuckles were dry from work and her nails trimmed short from practicality instead of style. Something about that hurt him more deeply than the pregnancy itself. "How far along are you?" he asked quietly. Claire froze. Around them, guests pretended not to watch while absolutely watching. Phones slowly lowered. Conversations softened into whispers beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Victoria stepped closer, her white heels clicking sharply across the marble floor. "Excuse me?" she said with a nervous laugh. "Why are you interrogating hotel staff at our wedding?" Ethan ignored her completely. His gaze never left Claire's face. Claire swallowed hard before answering. 7 months. 7 months. The words landed heavily inside his chest. Ethan instinctively calculated backward again, and immediately wished he had not. Every number led to him. To their final week together. To the stormy February night he packed his suitcase while Claire stood barefoot near the doorway asking him if there was somebody else. He remembered not answering her directly because silence felt easier than honesty. God. She had already been carrying his child. Victoria's smile finally cracked. "Wait," she said slowly, looking between them. "You know her?" Claire lowered her eyes again. Ethan answered before she could. "She was my wife." The sentence dropped into the ballroom like another shattered glass. Several guests exchanged stunned looks immediately. Victoria blinked twice as if she genuinely believed she misheard him. "You're what?" Ethan exhaled slowly, but it did nothing to steady the chaos building inside him. Claire stepped backward carefully, one hand supporting her stomach beneath the apron strings. "I should get back to work," she said quietly. "The manager already warned me once tonight." Ethan looked at her black shoes, worn at the edges from long shifts standing on marble floors. Then he noticed something else. A faded scar near her ankle. He remembered exactly where it came from. 3 summers ago Claire slipped while hiking in Colorado and laughed even while bleeding because she did not want him to cancel dinner reservations. Ethan suddenly realized he remembered everything about her. Every detail. Every small thing he once claimed he was too busy to notice. "Claire," he said softly, almost pleading now. She finally looked directly at him for the first time all night. And what terrified Ethan Blackwood most was not the exhaustion in her eyes. It was the complete absence of hope. Claire Donovan used to believe love could survive anything. Small apartments. Empty refrigerators. Student loan bills stacked beside second-hand furniture. Back then Ethan Blackwood was not the man standing beneath imported crystal chandeliers wearing a $12,000 tuxedo while guests fought for invitations to his wedding. He was just Ethan. The exhausted 26-year-old startup founder sleeping 3 hours a night beside glowing laptop screens while Claire worked double shifts at a coffee shop to help cover rent. She remembered those nights clearly now because standing in that ballroom felt like staring at 2 completely different lives stitched together by heartbreak. Ethan used to kiss her forehead every morning before sunrise and promise her that one day he would build something so big they would never worry about money again. And for a while she believed him. God, she believed every word. The first million changed his schedule. The second changed his personality. By the third, Claire barely recognized the man sitting across from her at dinner checking stock numbers instead of looking at her face. The silence between them grew slowly at first. Missed calls. Cancelled weekends. Empty apologies delivered through expensive flower arrangements instead of conversations. Then came Victoria Hale. Beautiful. Connected. Raised inside Manhattan penthouses and private schools where people like Claire only entered through service elevators. Claire still remembered the first time she met her at a charity fundraiser 3 years earlier. Victoria smiled politely while scanning Claire from head to toe like she was evaluating whether Ethan's girlfriend matched the image of a future billionaire. Apparently she did not. Ethan's mother certainly agreed. Caroline Blackwood never insulted Claire directly because women from old money preferred elegant cruelty over obvious cruelty. Instead, she used soft voices and fake concern. "You are sweet, Claire," she once said over dinner while adjusting diamond bracelets around her wrist. "But Ethan's future is becoming very important now. People will expect certain things from his wife." Claire understood exactly what she meant. Better education. Better connections. Better bloodlines. She was never supposed to survive inside their world. Ethan saw it happening too. That was the painful part. He saw every cold stare. Every subtle humiliation. Every dinner invitation addressed only to him. But ambition is a dangerous thing when mixed with fear. Ethan became terrified of losing everything he worked for, and eventually Claire started feeling less like a partner and more like a liability standing too close to his success. Then came the February storm. Claire could still hear rain hammering against apartment windows while Ethan quietly folded shirts into a suitcase near midnight. No screaming. No dramatic fight. Somehow that made it worse. "Tell me the truth," she whispered from the kitchen doorway while thunder rolled outside. "Is it her?" Ethan stopped moving for exactly 3 seconds before answering without looking at her. "Victoria understands the life I am trying to build." Claire remembered how cold the apartment suddenly felt after that sentence. Like every memory inside those walls had expired all at once. "And I do not?" she asked softly. Ethan closed the suitcase. "You deserve someone who can give you a normal life." Those words destroyed her because they sounded rehearsed. Like he had practiced leaving her long before that night. Claire never told him about the pregnancy afterward. At first she planned to. She stared at positive tests alone in a pharmacy bathroom less than 2 weeks after he walked away. But then tabloids started posting photos of Ethan and Victoria together at yacht parties in Miami while financial magazines called them Manhattan's new power couple. Claire saw the future clearly then. She would become another embarrassing chapter Ethan Black would bury behind wealth and polished headlines. So she disappeared quietly instead. Until fate placed her back in front of him carrying the one thing he never knew he left behind. The ballroom air felt heavier after Ethan admitted Claire had once been his wife. Guests who spent their lives pretending not to enjoy scandal suddenly became very interested in their champagne glasses and whispered conversations. Claire could feel their eyes following every movement she made as she carefully gathered broken pieces of crystal from the marble floor. Her lower back ached beneath the strain of standing for 10 straight hours, and the baby shifted again beneath her apron as if sensing her anxiety. She pressed a hand against her stomach for a brief second and forced herself to breathe normally. "Do not cry here. Not in front of these people. Not in front of him. Claire." Ethan said her name again, softer this time, almost like a memory he was afraid might disappear if he spoke too loudly. She ignored him and stood carefully with the tray balanced against her hip. The hotel manager appeared almost immediately beside her, sweat gathering near his collar despite the freezing ballroom air conditioning. "What is going on over here?" he hissed quietly. His eyes darted nervously between Ethan, Victoria, and the cluster of wealthy guests now openly staring. Claire lowered her head. "I dropped the tray. I am sorry." "Sorry does not cover a ruined wedding reception," Victoria interrupted sharply while dabbing wine from her gown with a cloth napkin handed to her by a bridesmaid. Her polished smile had vanished completely now. "Honestly, who hires someone 7 months pregnant to work a 12-hour shift?" Claire swallowed the humiliation silently because rent was due in 4 days and Dignity did not pay hospital bills. Ethan noticed the way her fingers tightened around the tray again. He remembered another night years ago when Claire dropped a coffee mug after receiving news that her mother's surgery was denied by insurance. Back then he held her for 2 straight hours while she cried into his sweater. Tonight he stood frozen several feet away while strangers mocked her exhaustion. Somehow that realization felt unbearable. "She was hired because she needed work," Ethan said coldly without taking his eyes off Claire. Victoria blinked at him in surprise. "Excuse me?" "I said enough?" His tone changed the room instantly. The same commanding voice that built boardrooms and silenced investors now cut through the ballroom with frightening calm. Claire looked up at him for the first time since the envelope fell. Ethan saw something flicker across her face, then disappear just as quickly. Not love. Not relief. Just confusion. Because this was the first time in years he had defended her instead of protecting his image. The manager cleared his throat nervously. Miss Donovan, perhaps you should take 10 minutes in the kitchen. Claire nodded immediately. Yes, sir. She turned to leave, but Ethan stepped forward instinctively. Wait. The single word stopped her near the edge of the dance floor while the violin quartet awkwardly continued playing as if music could somehow repair the tension suffocating the room. Ethan lowered his voice. Why did you never tell me? Claire laughed quietly then. Not bitterly. Worse. Tired. The kind of tired that came from surviving disappointment too many times. Tell you what exactly? She asked. That after you walked away and built your perfect life, I was left carrying pieces of it alone? Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Victoria folded her arms across her chest, clearly losing patience with the entire situation. This is unbelievable, she muttered. We are standing in the middle of our wedding reception discussing your ex-girlfriend's pregnancy. Ex-wife, Claire corrected softly without looking at her. Silence followed immediately. Small. Sharp. Deadly. Several guests exchanged glances again while phones slowly began appearing beneath tables. Ethan saw it happening. Videos. Recordings. Headlines waiting to be born before the wedding cake had even been served. But none of that mattered anymore because Claire suddenly swayed slightly where she stood. One hand gripped the edge of a nearby chair. Her face lost color so quickly it frightened him. Claire? Ethan moved toward her immediately. Claire tried to answer, but before the words came out, a sharp pain crossed her face and the silver tray slipped from her fingers for the second time that night. The silver tray struck the marble floor with a sharp metallic crack that silenced the ballroom for the third time that evening. Claire gripped the back of the chair beside her, breathing carefully through the sudden pain twisting across her lower stomach. It was not overwhelming yet, but it was enough to make fear flicker through her chest. Ethan reached her before anyone else could move. Claire, look at me, he said, his voice low and urgent now. She hated that her body reacted instantly to his presence. Even after everything. Even after years of teaching herself not to need him anymore. Claire forced herself upright slowly while the baby shifted hard beneath her ribs. I am fine, she whispered automatically, though her pale face said otherwise. Ethan noticed immediately. Claire always lied about pain. She did it when she had pneumonia during their second winter together, and still went to work because they could not afford missing rent. She did it when her mother died and spent the funeral comforting everyone else instead of grieving herself. And now she was doing it again while carrying his child alone. The realization hollowed him out from the inside. Victoria stepped forward sharply, irritation flashing across her perfectly composed features. Can somebody explain why my wedding has turned into a daytime television drama? She snapped. A few uncomfortable laughs escaped nearby guests, but the room no longer belonged to her. Ethan could feel it shifting. Attention moving away from the bride in white and toward the exhausted pregnant waitress, struggling to remain standing beneath ballroom lights. Claire noticed it too. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as whispers spread quietly around the tables. She could already imagine tomorrow morning's headlines. Billionaire groom reunites with pregnant ex-wife at wedding. Her stomach tightened again. Stress. The doctor warned her repeatedly about stress. I just need water, Claire said softly. Then I can finish my shift. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. You are not finishing anything tonight. I do not have a choice. You always have a choice. Claire looked directly at him then, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him stop talking. Because she was right. Wealthy men loved saying people had choices while standing far away from consequences. Ethan lived inside penthouses and private jets now. Claire lived inside overdue notices and hourly wages. Those were not the same worlds anymore. The hotel manager suddenly approached again, carrying forced politeness like a shield. "Miss Donovan," he began carefully, "perhaps it would be best if you clock out for the evening." Claire's face immediately tightened with panic. "Please do not fire me," she said quietly before she could stop herself. Ethan felt something inside him crack at those words. Claire Donovan used to spend entire paychecks helping strangers because she believed kindness always came back eventually. Now she was begging to keep a catering job while carrying his baby. "Nobody is firing her," Ethan said firmly. The manager blinked nervously. "Mr. Blackwood, with respect, the guests are becoming uncomfortable." Ethan slowly turned toward him. "Then they can leave." Silence. Even the violin music stopped completely this time. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a champagne glass clinked against another as somebody lowered it too quickly. Victoria stared at Ethan like she no longer recognized the man she was supposed to marry in less than an hour. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. Ethan ignored her. His attention remained fixed entirely on Claire. Then he noticed something else beneath the loose sleeve of her uniform. A hospital bracelet. White plastic. Recently removed but still wrapped around her wrist because she probably forgot it was there. Ethan gently touched it before she could hide it. "What hospital?" he asked quietly. Claire pulled her arm back immediately. "It does not matter." "Claire." Her eyes filled suddenly, though she fought hard to keep the tears from falling. "The baby is early," she admitted softly. "The doctor said I am supposed to stay off my feet as much as possible." Ethan looked around the ballroom slowly then. Crystal chandeliers. Gold-plated centerpieces. A 7-tier wedding cake decorated with imported flowers flown in from Paris. Millions of dollars surrounding the mother of his unborn child while she worked double shifts because she could not afford to rest. And for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwood felt ashamed of everything he owned. The shame hit Ethan Blackwood harder than any financial loss he had ever survived. He stood in the center of a ballroom filled with senators, investors, celebrities, and old money families while the mother of his unborn child tried to apologize for needing a job. Somewhere behind him, photographers continued snapping pictures beside the floral wedding arch worth nearly $80,000, but Ethan suddenly saw the entire evening differently. Not elegant. Not successful. Empty. Claire shifted uncomfortably beside the dance floor, one hand pressed carefully against her stomach, while the hotel staff awkwardly pretended not to stare. The baby kicked again beneath the black apron, and Ethan noticed how exhausted she looked under the ballroom lights. Tiny shadows beneath her eyes. Slight swelling near her ankles from standing too long. She should have been home resting. Instead, she was carrying silver trays through crowds of strangers while he prepared to promise forever to another woman. "This is ridiculous," Victoria finally snapped, breaking the silence that had swallowed the room. Her voice echoed sharply against marble and crystal. "Everybody is acting like she is some tragic movie character instead of a waitress who spilled drinks all over my wedding." Claire immediately lowered her eyes again. Reflex. Ethan hated that reflex. He remembered when Claire used to challenge him fearlessly during arguments, crossing her arms in oversized sweaters while telling him exactly when he was becoming arrogant. Somewhere along the way, life had trained her to become smaller around powerful people. "Victoria," Ethan warned quietly. "No, I want answers." She stepped closer now, white satin heels clicking against the floor with controlled anger. "Did you know she was pregnant before tonight?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Because the truth was worse. He did not know Claire was pregnant at all. He did not know she spent years struggling alone. He did not know she had been hospitalized recently. He did not know anything anymore. Victoria laughed once, cold and disbelieving. "You cannot seriously think this baby is yours." The words landed like a slap across the ballroom. Several guests visibly leaned closer. Claire closed her eyes briefly as if she no longer had energy to survive another humiliation tonight. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone." Victoria folded her arms. "Why?" Because suddenly your ex-wife appears carrying a baby during our wedding and everybody is supposed to ignore how convenient that looks? Claire inhaled sharply. Ethan saw it immediately. The hurt. Not anger. Hurt. Because despite everything, hearing herself reduced to a calculated scandal still wounded her. I never came here for him, Claire said softly. I came because I needed the paycheck. Her voice shook slightly near the end. The ballroom became painfully quiet again. Then one older woman near the front table slowly stood up from her chair. Claire recognized her instantly. Eleanor Whitmore, one of Manhattan's most respected charity founders. Years ago, Claire volunteered at Eleanor's community kitchens every Thanksgiving before Ethan became famous. Claire Donovan? The elderly woman asked gently. Claire blinked in surprise. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor's expression softened immediately as she stepped closer. My goodness, child. What happened to you? Those 6 words nearly destroyed Claire. Because nobody had asked her that in years. Not really. What happened to you? Not are you working here? Not whose baby is that? Not why are you standing in a billionaire's wedding covered in embarrassment? Just simple human concern. Claire's eyes filled instantly with tears she fought desperately to hide. Ethan noticed every second of it. Eleanor looked toward him then, disappointment darkening her expression. I remember when this young woman spent Christmas mornings serving meals to homeless families while you were still trying to pitch investors from borrowed office space, she said quietly. She believed in you before anybody else did. Ethan felt the weight of every guest in the room watching him now. Not admiring him. Judging him. Victoria scoffed impatiently. This is unbelievable. But Eleanor ignored her completely. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan with the calm disappointment only older women seemed capable of delivering. Money changes many things, Ethan Blackwood, she said softly. But tonight it revealed exactly who became poorer. Claire suddenly gripped the edge of a nearby table again, breathing unevenly as another sharp pain crossed her face. This time Ethan saw genuine fear in her eyes. For the first time that night, Ethan Blackwood forgot about his reputation completely. He forgot about the investors seated near the stage. Forgot about the reporters invited to document Manhattan's most anticipated wedding of the year. Forgot about the cameras quietly recording every second of the disaster unfolding beneath crystal chandeliers. All he saw was Claire gripping the table with trembling fingers while fear slowly replaced exhaustion in her eyes. Claire, he said quickly, stepping closer. Talk to me. She tried to straighten again, embarrassed by the attention gathering around her, but another wave of pain crossed her face before she could hide it. Ethan noticed the tiny sound she made under her breath. Small. Frightened. Human. It terrified him more than any screaming would have. I am okay, she whispered automatically. You are not okay. His voice came out sharper than intended. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances while Eleanor Whitmore moved beside Claire immediately, guiding her gently toward a nearby chair. Sit down, sweetheart, Eleanor said softly. Claire obeyed this time because she no longer had enough strength to pretend everything was fine. Ethan crouched in front of her without caring that expensive fabric from his tuxedo touched the ballroom floor. He had spent years building an image of control, but nothing about this moment felt controlled anymore. Claire's breathing had changed. Shorter now. Uneven. She pressed both hands protectively against her stomach while the violin quartet quietly stopped playing altogether. The silence inside the ballroom became overwhelming. Victoria stared at Ethan in disbelief. You are kneeling in front of your ex-wife during our wedding reception, she said slowly, like she could not fully process what she was seeing. Ethan looked up at her for the first time in several minutes. Claire needs a doctor. Claire needs boundaries. Victoria's voice cracked beneath the polished anger now. Do you seriously not see what she is doing? Ethan stood slowly. Enough. The single word landed with deadly calm. Victoria folded her arms tightly. She disappears for years and suddenly shows up pregnant at your wedding. You cannot honestly be this naive. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Ethan saw the shame hit her instantly even though she had done nothing wrong. That was the problem with humiliation. Eventually innocent people started apologizing for existing. I did not know he would be here, Claire said quietly. The hotel assigned staff schedules yesterday. And the pregnancy? Victoria pressed. Convenient timing too? Ethan's expression darkened immediately. Stop talking. Why? Because everybody here is thinking the same thing. Victoria looked around the ballroom dramatically. Do we even know whose baby this is? The room went still. Completely still. Claire slowly opened her eyes again, and Ethan saw something change inside them. Not weakness this time. Pain mixed with dignity. The kind that survives after everything else breaks. Claire carefully reached into her apron pocket again and pulled out a folded ultrasound report with shaking fingers. She stared at it for one long second before holding it toward Ethan. I never wanted anything from you, she said softly. Not your money. Not your sympathy. And definitely not this. Ethan took the paper carefully. Beneath the medical information was a smaller handwritten note from the doctor. High-risk pregnancy. Strict bed rest recommended. Patient continues working due to financial hardship. Ethan felt physically sick reading those words. Financial hardship. Claire Donovan used to donate winter coats to strangers while he worried about startup valuations and networking events. Now doctors were documenting her poverty in medical charts while he stood inside a ballroom covered in imported flowers. Eleanor noticed the report too. Her expression hardened immediately. My God, she whispered quietly. Then another voice suddenly echoed from the back of the room. Claire? Everyone turned at once. A tall man in dark blue scrubs stood near the ballroom entrance holding a medical supply bag. He looked slightly out of breath like he had rushed there. Claire's eyes widened instantly. Dr. Carter? Ethan looked between them sharply while the doctor moved closer, concern spreading across his face the second he saw Claire struggling to breathe. The hospital called me, he said quickly. You missed your emergency appointment this afternoon. Then his eyes dropped toward Ethan standing beside her, and his expression changed completely. Wait, he said slowly. You are Ethan Blackwood? The moment Dr. Carter recognized Ethan Blackwood, the entire atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted again. Claire immediately looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of the chair as another sharp cramp crossed her stomach. Ethan noticed it instantly now. Every flinch. Every shallow breath. Every attempt she made to hide discomfort because she was too used to surviving alone. Dr. Carter moved beside her quickly, setting his medical bag onto the marble floor before crouching to her level. Claire, when was the last time you rested? He asked gently. Claire hesitated. That hesitation alone answered the question. The doctor exhaled heavily and rubbed a hand across his jaw. You were supposed to stay home after the contractions started yesterday. Ethan's head snapped toward him immediately. Yesterday? Dr. Carter glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to Claire. She came into the emergency room dehydrated and exhausted after collapsing during a double shift. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Collapsed? Claire closed her eyes in frustration. Please stop. Her voice cracked softly. I do not want everybody hearing this. But everybody already was hearing it. Wealthy guests stood frozen around gold-decorated tables pretending not to stare while listening to every word. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, somebody quietly stopped recording video and lowered their phone, suddenly ashamed to keep filming. Ethan knelt beside Claire again, his voice quieter now. Why did you not call me? Claire laughed weakly under her breath. Call you where? Your yacht? Your penthouse? Your engagement photos? Every word hit harder because she said them without cruelty. Just exhaustion. Ethan looked down at the engagement ring still on his hand and suddenly it felt unbearably heavy. Victoria stepped forward again, but now her confidence looked strained around the edges. This is becoming completely inappropriate, she said tightly. We have guests waiting for a ceremony. Dr. Carter stood slowly, finally looking directly at her. A ceremony can wait, he replied calmly. Stress at this stage of pregnancy is dangerous. Victoria folded her arms defensively. And exactly how dangerous are we talking? The doctor hesitated for 1 second too long. Ethan noticed immediately. Doctor, he said sharply. Answer her. Dr. Carter looked back toward Claire first, silently asking permission. Claire's eyes filled with panic almost instantly. Please do not. Ethan's pulse quickened. Claire. She shook her head weakly. I was going to handle it myself. That sentence terrified him more than anything else tonight. Because it meant there was something worse still coming. Dr. Carter finally spoke quietly. The baby is measuring small for 7 months. Ethan felt ice spread through his chest. What does that mean? It means stress and exhaustion are affecting the pregnancy. Claire stared at the marble floor while tears slowly gathered in her eyes. I missed too many prenatal appointments because I could not afford time off work, she whispered. Then the hospital bills started piling up. Eleanor Whitmore covered her mouth softly beside them. Ethan looked around the ballroom in disbelief. Thousands of white roses imported from Europe. A custom orchestra. Ice sculptures shaped like swans. Enough luxury surrounding them tonight to pay Claire's medical care 10 times over. Yet she had been skipping doctor visits while carrying his child because she could not afford missing work. Ethan suddenly understood something horrifying. Claire never told him about the pregnancy because somewhere deep down she believed he would choose wealth over her again. And she was probably right. At least the old Ethan would have. Victoria stepped backwards slowly as reality finally settled over the room. You are telling me this entire wedding stopped because your ex-wife is pregnant with your baby? She asked Ethan quietly. He looked at Claire. Pale. Exhausted. Terrified. Still apologizing with her eyes for becoming inconvenient. Ethan answered without hesitation this time. Yes. The single word echoed through the ballroom like a final verdict. Victoria's face completely changed then. Not anger anymore. Humiliation. Because she realized every person in that room now understood the same thing. Ethan Blackwood was not staring at his bride tonight. He was staring at the woman he never truly stopped loving. Claire suddenly inhaled sharply and grabbed Ethan's sleeve before she could stop herself. Fear flashed across her face instantly. Dr. Carter looked down at her hands, then toward the floor beneath the chair. His expression tightened immediately. Claire, he said carefully, I think we need to get you to the hospital right now. Everything after that moment happened faster than Ethan Blackwood could fully process. Hotel staff rushed across the ballroom. The orchestra quietly packed away instruments while guests whispered behind raised champagne glasses. Claire sat trembling in the chair near the dance floor, one hand gripping Ethan's sleeve so tightly it wrinkled the fabric of his tuxedo. She looked terrified now. Not embarrassed anymore. Just scared for the tiny life depending entirely on her. Dr. Carter carefully checked her pulse while speaking in the calm voice doctors used when situations became serious enough to frighten everyone else. Claire, I need you to breathe slowly for me. Ethan crouched beside her immediately. I am coming with you. Claire looked up at him through exhausted eyes filled with confusion. You do not have to. Ethan almost laughed at how absurd those words sounded now. He had spent years convincing himself success required sacrifice. Tonight he finally understood something devastating. The sacrifice had always been her. Victoria stood several feet away near the wedding arch, completely forgotten by most of the room. Her perfect evening had unraveled so publicly that even the photographers no longer pointed cameras toward the flowers or cake. Every lens followed Claire instead. The tired waitress carrying the billionaire's child while wearing shoes worn thin from standing through double shifts. Eleanor Whitmore slowly walked toward Victoria with a sadness that somehow felt sharper than anger. Child, she said quietly, a marriage built on somebody else's heartbreak rarely survives the ceremony. Victoria said nothing. Because deep down she knew Eleanor was right. Ethan helped Claire stand carefully while Dr. Carter signaled hotel security to clear a path through the crowd. Claire winced softly as another contraction tightened across her stomach. Instantly Ethan's hand moved protectively against her back without thinking. The gesture looked natural. Familiar. Like some part of him still remembered exactly how to care for her even after years apart. Claire noticed it too. For one dangerous second, her expression softened. Then reality returned just as quickly. "The hospital is 15 minutes away with traffic," Dr. Carter said firmly. Ethan nodded once. "My driver is outside." "No." Claire's voice came unexpectedly sharp. Everyone looked at her. She swallowed hard before continuing more quietly. "I am not becoming another headline tomorrow." Ethan stared at her in silence. Because she was right again. His world consumed people and turned private pain into entertainment. Claire had spent years protecting herself from becoming another glamorous tragedy attached to his name. But then she looked down at her stomach and fear cracked through her composure once more. Ethan saw it instantly. The fear of a mother who had already carried too much alone. "Claire," he said softly, "please let me help this time." She looked at him for a very long moment, while the ballroom stood completely still around them. Crystal chandeliers reflected in her tear-filled eyes. Somewhere near the kitchen doors, staff members quietly stopped working just to watch what she would say next. Finally Claire nodded once. Small. Fragile. But enough. Ethan exhaled like a man surviving underwater too long. As they moved slowly toward the ballroom exit together, guests instinctively stepped aside. Not because Ethan Blackwood was powerful. Because Claire Donovan had become something far more difficult to ignore. Proof. Proof that loyalty still existed in a world obsessed with status. Proof that some women carried unimaginable pain with quiet dignity, while men chased money believing it could replace love. Near the entrance, Ethan suddenly stopped walking. Claire looked at him in confusion. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan removed the platinum wedding ring from his finger. The ballroom collectively held its breath. Victoria's face went pale. Ethan placed the ring quietly onto a nearby champagne table without saying a single word. He did not need to. The silence said everything. Then he turned back toward Claire and walked beside her out of the ballroom while camera flashes exploded behind them like distant lightning. Hours later, long after the wedding guests disappeared and the ballroom lights dimmed, one photograph from that night spread across every news station in America. Not the ruined wedding cake. Not the billionaire groom. Not the society bride standing alone beneath imported flowers. The photo people could not stop staring at showed a pregnant waitress leaving through the front doors of the Grand Windsor Hotel, while the richest man in Manhattan carried her hospital bag like it was the most important thing he had ever held. Because sometimes a man can lose billions and still recover. But losing the woman who loved him before the world did? That kind of poverty lasts forever.